I never expected her to see through me so quickly, but the way her aunt looked at me that night, it was as if she already knew the one weakness I tried hardest to hide. I still remember that night like it was painted in softer colors than the rest of my life. The living room was buzzing with familiar noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the background hum of family conversations weaving into one another. I wasn't expecting anything remarkable. I was just a guest, a younger face among people who'd known each other for years longer than I'd been alive. And then she walked in, her aunt. I didn't know her name yet, only that the moment she entered the room, the atmosphere shifted, as if someone had quietly dimmed the lights and drawn all focus to her. She wasn't trying to take up space. She didn't need to. It was in the way she carried herself. Confident without show, graceful without trying. She greeted the others with a warmth that felt practiced, but when her eyes finally landed on me, something different happened. I froze for a second under her gaze. It wasn't sharp or judgmental. It was steady, like she'd seen me before, somewhere in a place I'd never been, as if she already knew something about me I hadn't even said out loud. I smiled politely, probably too quickly, trying to brush away the odd sensation. She stepped closer, extending her hand in introduction. Her fingers were warm, her grip delicate but certain, and I was struck by how natural it felt to hold her hand just a second longer than etiquette required. Her perfume lingered in the air, not overpowering, just a faint, elegant trace, like jasmine at the end of summer. I released her hand and told her my name, my voice lower than usual, though I wasn't sure if that was nerves or something else. She repeated it softly, as if tasting the weight of it before nodding. Around us, the conversations carried on, but I hardly registered them anymore. The clinking of a spoon against a glass, the bursts of laughter. They all faded into background noise, while she tilted her head ever so slightly and gave me a smile that was not just polite, but curious. It was such a small thing, a first meeting like any other. But in that instant, I knew this wasn't going to be like the others. There was a spark of awareness, an invisible thread that tightened between us without either of us pulling. I didn't say much more that night, not then. I didn't need to, because from the very beginning, even before words passed between us, I felt it, the quiet truth that she saw something in me, something I didn't even realize I was showing. And it left me wondering, was it interest? Or was it something far more dangerous, recognition? Later that evening, I found myself drifting toward the kitchen. Maybe I needed space from the noise, maybe I was just looking for water. But when I stepped inside, she was already there, her aunt. She was arranging glasses on the counter, her movements calm, unhurried, like someone who never rushed for anyone and didn't need to. For a moment, I considered leaving, giving her space. But before I could, she turned and smiled at me as if she'd been expecting me. "Thirsty?" she asked, her voice smooth, carrying just enough warmth to make me feel both welcome and strangely unsteady. I nodded, trying not to sound as awkward as I felt. Yeah, I guess I needed a break from the noise. She handed me a glass, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. The touch was fleeting, but it left a quiet trail of awareness that I couldn't ignore. She leaned against the counter, tilting her head as she studied me. "So, what do you do?" It was an ordinary question, but the way she asked it wasn't ordinary at all. Her eyes didn't just wait for an answer. They searched for it. I told her about my work, about being at that strange in-between stage of life where you're expected to know who you are but still piecing it together day by day. Most people nod politely at answers like that. She didn't. She listened, really listened. Her gaze stayed fixed, her expression thoughtful, as though every word mattered. "And what do you want to do?" she asked. That question made me pause. Wanting and doing felt like two different worlds, and I wasn't sure anyone had bothered to notice that difference before. I fumbled through an answer, but she smiled knowingly, like she could hear what I wasn't saying. I tried to shift the focus back to her, asking about her life, her work. She answered with an ease that came only with time and experience. But there were layers beneath her words, hints of stories untold. She wasn't oversharing, but there was a gravity in her tone that made me curious. The longer we spoke, the closer I felt to something I couldn't quite name. Her arm brushed against mine when she reached for a plate, and I felt the warmth of it long after. Her laughter, low, genuine, stayed in the room like music even when the sound faded. And every time her eyes met mine, there was something deliberate about it. Not a glance, not an accident, a choice. It was just small talk, questions, answers, passing moments. But beneath it all, there was a weight neither of us acknowledged out loud. The kind of weight that makes you wonder how two strangers can feel so much without saying anything at all. And I realized she wasn't just talking to me. She was reading me, quietly, carefully. And maybe, just maybe, she already understood more than I wanted her to. I thought maybe I was imagining it, that the pull between us was nothing more than me overthinking. But as the night unfolded, it became harder to convince myself of that, because every time I glanced her way, she was already looking, not staring, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but in those moments when the room buzzed with chatter and people's attention scattered everywhere, hers seemed to anchor on me. It was subtle, a quiet watching, and the strange part was I didn't feel judged. I felt understood. Later, I caught her eyes across the room. She was laughing politely at someone's story, holding a glass of wine in her hand, but her gaze flicked to me in the middle of it. And when it did, her smile shifted softer, almost secret, as if meant only for me. It unsettled me, because it wasn't just attraction. It felt like recognition. At one point, I stepped outside to catch my breath, the cool air easing the weight in my chest. When I came back in, she was standing near the hallway, waiting for someone to finish a story. As I passed by, she leaned slightly toward me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You don't talk much, do you?" I froze at her words, caught between defensiveness and honesty. "I guess I don't always feel like I have something worth saying." She tilted her head, studying me with those calm, steady eyes. "That's not true. You just don't give your words away cheaply." The comment hit deeper than it should have, because she was right. And how could she know that after only a few hours? Before I could respond, someone else called her name, and she stepped away, leaving me standing there with my pulse racing. The rest of the night, I kept trying to shake it, but her presence lingered. Even in the crowded room, I could feel the brush of her awareness, like an invisible thread tied between us. And every time she moved past me, the soft graze of her hand on my arm, or her shoulder brushing mine in passing, carried more weight than it should have. I started to wonder if she knew the effect she had on me, if she did it intentionally, or if she simply lived in a way that drew people closer without trying. But deep down, I suspected the truth. She knew. She knew I noticed her. She knew I couldn't hide the way my focus betrayed me. And the more I tried to look away, the more her quiet observation pulled me in. That night, I realized something dangerous. She wasn't just watching me. She was seeing me. And once someone sees you like that, it's impossible to go back. It was late enough in the evening that people had started to scatter. Some stepped outside to smoke. Others crowded into the living room where the music played louder. The house felt full and empty at the same time. Laughter echoing from one corner, silence pressing in from another. That's how I found myself alone in the kitchen again. Or at least I thought I was alone. Until she walked in. Her aunt. She carried a small plate in her hands, setting it on the counter before giving me that same quiet smile I'd been trying, and failing, to stop thinking about all night. "Looks like we're the last ones standing," she said softly, her tone somewhere between amusement and something gentler. I laughed under my breath, trying to appear casual. "Guess so. I don't mind the quiet." She leaned against the counter, arms folding loosely. Not defensive, not closed off, just comfortable. At ease. And for a second I envied that about her. The way she could own silence without rushing to fill it. We talked at first about nothing, the food, the music, the gathering itself. But the conversation shifted the way rivers do, without warning, without effort. She asked me about regrets, about choices I'd made. Not in a heavy way, but as though she wanted to know the parts of me most people overlooked. I hesitated before answering, maybe because her gaze made it impossible to lie. I think I spend too much time worrying about what other people see when they look at me, like I'm always trying to prove I belong. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer easy reassurances. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression softening with something that looked like recognition. "I know that feeling," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost reflective. "When you're younger, you think it'll go away with age. But it doesn't. You just get better at hiding it." Her honesty disarmed me. For a moment, the air between us felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I looked down, half smiling to mask my nerves, and that's when I felt it, her hand, light against my forearm. Just a small touch, enough to steady me, but it sent a warmth flooding through me that words couldn't explain. I looked up, and she was already watching me, not with pity, not with judgment, but with that same steady gaze that made me feel like she saw far more than I was saying. The clock ticked somewhere in the background, every second louder in the stillness. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. And in that silence, I realized how dangerous it was to feel this much comfort, this much closeness, with someone I'd only just met. And yet, I didn't want to step back. I kept telling myself to breathe, to keep things light, to not read too much into every glance, every word, every brush of her hand. But the more time passed, the harder it became to convince myself. Because she wasn't pulling away. If anything, she was leaning closer. We sat across from each other now, the rest of the house carrying on like we were in a different world altogether. A half-empty glass sat between us, but neither of us touched it. The air felt heavier than wine, heavier than conversation. I tried to distract myself with safe questions. Work, family, travel. She answered, but her answers always circled back to me, always finding a way to turn the mirror around. "You're serious for your age," she said at one point, her tone not mocking but curious. "Most men your age talk a lot but say very little. You don't waste words." I laughed nervously, unsure what to do with that kind of attention. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She tilted her head, studying me the way a painter studies a canvas. Then, with the faintest smile, she said, "That depends on who's listening." The words hit me harder than they should have. And before I could gather a reply, she leaned forward slightly, resting her elbow on the table, her chin balanced in her hand. Her eyes didn't leave mine. Not once. It was the kind of look that stripped away all the little shields I'd been holding up. The polite smile, the casual small talk, the effort to pretend I wasn't shaken by her presence. All of it felt pointless under the weight of her gaze. And then it happened. Her aunt looked at me like she knew my weakness, like she'd already found the crack in my composure, the soft spot I'd never shown anyone else. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was quiet, deliberate, and impossibly tender. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of every inch between us, and every inch I wished didn't exist. My hands rested on my knees, tense, until she reached across the table, her fingertips brushing against mine as though she was testing how far this could go. The touch was brief, but my breath caught anyway. "You try so hard to hide it," she said softly, her voice meant for no one else. "But you wear your heart in your eyes. That's a gift and a danger." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to pull away, to reclaim the distance. But another part, stronger, hungrier, wanted to close the gap completely. That was the boundary. We both felt it. The fragile line between restraint and something we couldn't take back. And in her steady, knowing gaze, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of crossing it. She was waiting to see if I would. I don't know how long we sat there, locked in that fragile space between words and silence. Time seemed to blur, stretched thin by the weight of everything unspoken. Every second I spent in her presence made it harder to pretend. At some point, I exhaled a laugh, the kind you let out when you're cornered by your own feelings. My hand brushed against my face, trying to mask the storm inside me. But when I looked back at her, she was still there, steady, patient, waiting. And that's when I realized she wasn't going to rescue me from this. She wasn't going to let me hide. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I can't figure out what it is about you, but I feel like you've had me figured out since the second I walked in tonight. Her lips curved, not into a grin but into something softer. A knowing smile. Maybe I have, she said. The answer made my chest tighten. I could have left it there. Let the tension fade, retreat into safer territory. But I didn't, couldn't. I should probably keep this to myself, I murmured, my voice low. But I can't. I feel drawn to you, more than I want to admit. The room felt impossibly still after I said it, like the house itself was holding its breath. I braced myself for her to laugh, or worse, to gently dismiss me with the kind of grace she carried in everything she did. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, eyes still locked on mine, her expression unreadable for a long, unbearable moment. Then she said quietly, "I noticed." 2 words. That was all it took for my world to tilt. "You noticed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze softened, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her. "From the beginning. The way you look at me, you don't hide it very well." She paused, her fingers brushing absently along the rim of her glass. "But you need to understand something. Feelings like this, they change everything. They don't just live in the shadows. Once they're spoken, they're real." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't permission either. It was a warning, a reminder that this wasn't just a passing crush or a harmless spark. Still, I couldn't look away. "Then maybe they should be real," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to mean it. For a moment, her hand slid across the table, resting lightly over mine. Her thumb traced a slow, almost imperceptible circle against my skin. The warmth of that touch sent a shiver through me. And then, just as suddenly, she pulled her hand back. Her eyes softened, but her voice carried the weight of restraint. "Be careful with your heart," she whispered, "because once you give it away, you don't get it back." The night stretched on, but the energy had shifted. I could feel it in my chest. Not just nerves, not just attraction, but something heavier, something lasting. We didn't move closer after her warning. In fact, we stayed where we were, a table between us, as if it were the last fragile barrier holding everything in place. Yet the silence we shared wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was thick with everything we had just admitted, everything we had chosen not to cross. Eventually, I stood, more to release the tension in my body than because I wanted to leave. She rose too, almost instinctively, as though my movement had pulled her with me. We faced each other in the quiet kitchen, the dim light wrapping the space in a hush that felt sacred. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Her eyes softened, and I swear I could see the conflict there, the push and pull of desire and restraint. Then, without warning, she stepped forward. Her arms wrapped around me. It wasn't a quick, polite hug. It was slow, intentional. She held me as if she knew this was the only way we could let ourselves say everything else. My arms came around her almost automatically, and I felt the warmth of her body, the curve of her cheek against my temple, the faint scent of jasmine clinging to her hair. Time seemed to slow. My heart beat against hers, and for those few seconds, there was no question, no doubt. Just closeness. just the truth of what we both felt. When she finally pulled back, her hands lingered against my shoulders before slipping away. She looked at me with an expression that was both tender and unyielding. "Some things," she whispered, "aren't meant to be rushed." The words settled deep in me, both a comfort and a weight. I nodded, unable to speak, because anything I said would have broken the fragile honesty of that moment. She smiled then, a small, almost secret smile, and reached up to brush a strand of hair away from my forehead, her fingers trailing just lightly enough to make my skin burn with memory. "You'll understand one day," she added softly. And just like that, the moment ended. When I finally walked out of that house later, the night air was cool against my face, but I carried her warmth with me. Every step away felt heavier than it should have, yet somehow lighter too, as though I'd been given something I didn't fully deserve but would never forget. We hadn't crossed the line. We hadn't made promises. But something had shifted between us, and I knew I would carry it long after the night was over. Because the truth was simple. She had seen me, really seen me, and once someone does that, you're never quite the same again. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances told in this style. And if you think someone else would feel the weight of this story the way you did, share it with them too. Every little bit of support helps me bring you more stories like this one.